Well, everybody's heard about the bird. Bird, bird, bird. The bird's the word. Well, a bird, bird, bird. Bird is the word. Well, a bird.
Hey, Suanna.
Hey, Lynn.
Good to see you.
It's good to see you too.
I wanted to ask you a couple of questions. One about, I know you're an old Cocoa native, and how your family got here, and a little bit about your elementary school years. I know that's when you and I first made friends.
That's true.
And how did you and your family come to Brevard County?
My dad was born in Jacksonville. My mother was born in Melbourne. And my dad had heard about a job opening in a bank in Cocoa as a cashier in the year 1929. And he came and applied for the job. And while he was here, a friend of his had arranged for a blind date. And that's when he met my mother. And so they married shortly thereafter, settled in Cocoa, and my two sisters and I were born right here in Cocoa and raised here.
So the bank he worked for, did that later become Barnett Bank?
Yes,
I know
it
that's
did.
the one most of us are familiar with.
That's right. Mm-hmm.
I can remember the State Theater, but not the State Bank.
I didn't remember it as being the State Bank. In my memory, it had always been the Barnett Bank.
You probably have a few memories of the State Theater, don't you?
Boy, do I. You know, when we were younger, it was nothing for us to go by the bank, myself and maybe a couple of little girlfriends, and I'm talking young at those days. You could roam the streets of Cocoa and feel very safe. But we would go in the bank and Dad would give me my 50 cents, and then we would cut through the alleyways from where the Barnett Bank was and come right out by the State Theater. And back then you could probably get in for what, a quarter, maybe less. I think you mentioned in your interview that it might have been you and me that went, and you were a few cents short getting in, and somebody had to loan you some money.
I remember that they had a balcony on the side where the black people would have to go up the side entrance. They couldn't come in the front entrance.
Yeah.
And they had a balcony above our balcony was where they came. And
That's a good memory, Lynn. I didn't.
You probably also remember though that R.O. Nichols used to have the free shows that we would
Yes.
go to when we were children.
And played Santa Claus in the Christmas parades too.
Were you actually born in the Woodstock Hospital here?
The old Woodstock Hospital. It was one wing sitting on a hill with maybe 15 rooms at the time.
I know you left town for a while, Suanna, and how long have you been back in Brevard? And you were in South Carolina, I think, for a while before that.
Yeah. I left to go to business college in a few months after graduation. Went to Jacksonville. One of my best friends, Faye Dorman, was attending school there, and I really had no aspirations to go to college. I didn't know what I wanted to do, so I went up there and I met my first husband. He was in the Coast Guard, and shortly after that we moved to South Carolina. Little mill town between Augusta, Georgia and Aiken, South Carolina. And my son was born there and lived there. We lived there about 11 years, and eventually came back home around 1976.
Now I know you and George Hamilton, our friend, have been married for quite a while now. How did you and George reconnect? I know from pictures I've seen you guys were high school dates anyway. I don't know if you were sweethearts.
Yes.
And you mentioned that you got caught breaking the daylight rule. But how did you reconnect with George after so many years?
I happened to run into his sister, Mary Lou Hamilton. I was working at Bob Ennis, Oldsmobile on Merritt Island, after my son and I came back. And Mary Lou brought her car in one day and we reconnected, and she told me George was living in Ocala at the time, and I presume it was shortly thereafter she mentioned to George that she had run into me and I was home and had divorced, and found out a few months after that that he had been going through a divorce too, and we just sort of started talking and took up where we left off, being good friends, and then decided to get married and blend our family. He had custody of his two babies, I call them. They were 2 and 4 at the time. My son was about 8.
Now how about the rest of your family? Did you have brothers or sisters, and you mentioned your children. Do you have grandchildren now?
7.
Wow.
Yeah, 6 boys and a girl, and they're joyful. Our oldest is 16 and our youngest is 2. I had 2 sisters, both older. Dottie was 14 years older. My sister Sandra is 7 years older. Dottie Jean has since passed away. They're both Cocoa High graduates too. 3 children, 2 boys and a girl, 7 grandchildren, and the boys graduated from Cocoa High. Both of them did.
Did you ever work, Suanna?
Yes, I did, Lynn. When I got out of high school, I worked briefly for Dr. Weisberg, who was a podiatrist in downtown Cocoa Village. And then when I went to school in Jacksonville, I worked for an insurance company. And when we moved to South Carolina, I worked for a mill company. I worked in human resources, secretary, insurance. And then when I came back home, worked for a car dealership for a while, and then went to work for GMAC, which is where I retired from in 1999.
Are you enjoying retirement?
Loving it, loving it.
Do you travel?
Yes. George retired 2 years later, and he doesn't like to fly. So one of the first trips we did is we closed up the house, we packed up our car, put our bike rack on the back, bicycles, and we drove out west. We were gone a month, and it was wonderful. We've done it twice since.
Have you stayed in touch with any of our high school classmates?
Yeah, and Facebook makes it a lot easier. But so many of our classmates came back here or never left. You can go anywhere just about and run into a classmate. But yes, I stayed in touch with several. Carol Ann Watley, Sharon Moist.
Was there a group you hung out with in school?
Those 2 particular, yes.
I think you mentioned you had a group that you called the Magnificent
Magnificent Seven, yes. Oh, yeah.
That's probably what what us guys called you too.
Probably so. Yeah, we were the rowdy bunch. It was Sharon Morris, Karen Reynolds, Donna Waltz, Barb Ticken, and Gwen Asher, who was a year ahead of us. But yeah, we loved to do things together. We just raised a lot of heck.
How about sports? Did you?
No, I wasn't very athletically inclined, but I did play on the powder puff.
You did? Did you
Yeah.
have a favorite coach in
Oh
your
my
powder puff?
gosh. Student coach?
Yeah.
Let me see, maybe Steve Greer. Yeah, Steve was probably a good coach. Well, they all were. We had a great time.
Who was your favorite teacher in school?
Dabney Davis, and I've heard this before, he really was my favorite, but Mr. Terrell, Mr. Shepard too. I liked Miss Dotson. You know, she taught, what was it, typing and shorthand, and she was a real sweetheart. She was an encourager. I really liked her too.
Were you in chorus?
I was. I tried to position myself between strong singers. I didn't have a very good voice, but had a wonderful time in chorus.
But you would sing to George?
Always serenade George. Just ask him about it.
What was, you have something funny or embarrassing that happened in school?
One of the things that I can remember clearly was being caught breaking the daylight rule. George and I got caught holding hands.
Do you remember who caught you?
You know, I don't remember. I don't.
What did they do? Was they just said, y'all stop that now?
Yeah, they threatened us that if it happened again, we would get to go see the dean. So we were very careful after that.
And I think you had also mentioned earlier a drive-in incident that happened.
Oh boy. Yes, it was one of those weekends when the Magnificent Seven, some of us didn't have dates. And so we decided we were just going to sneak in the Vanguard drive-in. And I had my mom's station wagon. It was quite a heavy vehicle. And in trying to sneak in, we got bogged down in mud, sand. It could have been either. And we had to, 4 of us just went through the drive-in and tried to recognize cars of friends and just started knocking on windows, the foggy ones, seeing if any of the guys could help us get out. And I think Rennie Leroy, Steve Greer, there were a couple of others that were willing to push us out so we didn't have to call a tow truck or our parents. I
know you're a big FSU fan. Tell me about that.
What? Oh my goodness. Really? Boo hiss. Gator fan. My dad was a Gator fan. Our daughter graduated from University of Florida with a teacher's degree. And you know, this year was just so sad for us, but win or lose, we're Gator fans. Go Gators!
Are you going on the cruise after our reunion?
We sure are. We're really looking forward to that.
Have you been on a cruise?
We went to Alaska a few years ago. As a matter of fact, what was so nice about that was Of the 7 couples that went on that cruise together, 5 of the couples, we all went to Cocoa High together. It was wonderful. So we're looking forward to the after reunion cruise.
Good. You have any messages for our classmates, Suanna?
Yes. This is going to be a wonderful reunion. The committee has worked diligently since the end of 2012 to really bring this together. And it's been so hard to find a lot of our old classmates. And Robert Pippin has just done a jam-up job. But, you know, we've got maybe 15 or 18 that are on the committee. So I encourage everyone that's even giving it a thought to please come. We are going to have such a good time, and you're going to realize that it doesn't matter where you were in high school. It's what matters now. And I just encourage everyone to come. I do. Thank you, Lynn.
Thanks, Suanna.
You're welcome.